That night, the city of Cedar Hills was shrouded in a misty haze with gentle cold winds sweeping through the silent streets. Leah Johnson, a 23-year-old young woman, was driving home after a meaningful college graduation party. Her heart was filled with joy and hope for the vast future ahead. Suddenly, from behind, the sound of a police siren blared. A black car pulled up beside Leah, its flashing red and blue lights flickering like ghostly lanterns in the dark night. Officer Michael Blake stepped out, and his gaze cold and suspicious. "You're stopped for a traffic violation," he said sharply, as if facing a dangerous criminal. Leah gently explained that she complied with all regulations, but Blake refused to listen. The conversation between them grew tense, each word stabbing Leah's mind like sharp knives. When she tried to take out her phone to call her father, Judge David Johnson, hoping for help, everything suddenly turned upside down. A gunshot rang out, breaking the night silence, a piercing red flash. Leah collapsed, her heart stopped beating in the dark gloom. The ambulance sirens wailed hurried footsteps in the night, and the last call Leah sent to her father, all blending into a silent tragedy. That night not only was a life lost, but a story of injustice, of the dangerous prejudices society still faces. Can you feel the calm before the storm, the chaos of a moment, and the hope extinguished within Leah? Let's embark on this journey together to hear a story not only of Leah Johnson, but also of justice and courage, fighting against deep injustices. Before diving into the main story, please share with us a little. Where are you listening to this story, and what time is it? Let us know how far this story has spread and who it has touched. Now let's explore the story right away. After that fateful night, the early morning light filtered through the window of Leah Johnson's small room. The 23-year-old young woman was a devoted daughter full of ambition and enthusiasm for the future. Leah was not only an outstanding student at Cedar Hills University, but also a loving friend and daughter, especially sharing a deep bond with her father, federal judge David Johnson. "Leah, you've always been my pride," David once told her on a peaceful evening by the fireplace. Leah smiled softly, her eyes full of love. "I know, Dad, and I will never disappoint you." Since childhood, Leah dreamed of becoming a politician, someone who could change the world in her own way. She devoted her childhood to studying, participating in social activities, always aiming for justice and inclusion. The Johnson family lived in a quiet neighborhood where children's laughter and warm stories were always abundant. Leah's parents taught her the values of truth, fairness, and responsibility. "Everyone has the right to be treated fairly, Leah. No matter how unjust the world is, we must stand up and defend what is right," David advised. Leah grew up in those loving arms, but she soon realized that society did not always treat people like her fairly, a young, talented black woman with big dreams. In meetings with friends, Leah often shared her thoughts about the injustices she witnessed. "We need change, not just in words, but in concrete actions. I want to be that person." Her friend Maya often encouraged her, "Leah, you're our inspiration. Don't let anything hold you back." Leah was prepared for the future with a political science degree in hand and a passionate soul. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but with family love and great dreams, she was ready to face all challenges. But that fateful night changed everything. Imagine a young woman just stepping into her future, extinguished in a moment by prejudice and the mistake of a man in a police uniform. However, Leah's story is not only a personal tragedy, but also a powerful call for change, for a society where everyone is respected and treated fairly. Can you sense the fragility of a dream, the depth of belief, and the determination of a young woman? Even in the harshest circumstances. Let's continue into the story of Officer Michael Blake, the man who will face the challenge of his life and how prejudice has impacted the fate of all of us. Michael Blake, the 34-year-old white police officer of Cedar Hills, was no stranger to scandals in the force. Since starting his career, he had gained a reputation for a tough attitude, sometimes rude, and had been warned multiple times for unprofessional behavior. Blake has always had issues with how he approaches people, especially within communities of color, and anonymous colleagues shared. He had been complained about for disrespectful behavior, even once threatening an innocent black man during a minor traffic incident. However, Michael Blake always denied all allegations. "I'm just doing and I believe I'm protecting the public," he said in a rare interview. But few knew that Blake carried deep-seated prejudices from childhood, growing up in a suburb steeped in conservative thinking and racial bias. In a conversation with a close friend, Blake once confided, "I feel pressured to prove myself in this environment. Sometimes I overreact to hold my position." His friend advised, "You need to learn to control your emotions, especially when dealing with people who are different." But work pressure, lack of leadership support, in the police culture environment made Blake increasingly harsh and suspicious of everyone, especially those unlike himself. This condition was not only Blake's personal problem, but also a symptom of a police system lacking training in cultural awareness and anti-racism. Before the incident with Leah, Blake had faced multiple warnings but had never been disciplined seriously. On the day of the incident, Blake was tense and fatigued after many hours of continuous work, which further impaired his control in reacting to Leah. Psychological analysis shows that officers like Blake can easily get caught in cycles of pressure and prejudice, leading to grave mistaken decisions. This also serves as a warning about the need for extensive training, supervision, and reform within police forces to minimize tragic cases like Leah's. Can you imagine how someone carrying so much pressure, along with unresolved prejudices, could make a decision that changes the life of a young woman so drastically? Let's continue exploring the details of the traffic stop and the tense moments that led to that tragedy in the next part. That night on the quiet streets of Cedar Hills, Leah Johnson gently steered her silver car, enjoying the cool air after the graduation party. Suddenly, the flashing red and blue lights of a police car appeared behind her, the siren blared, echoing through the silent space. Leah calmly pulled over to the side, her heart still full of hope and without any suspicion of what was about to happen. Officer Michael Blake stepped out of the car, tall and confident, with a hint of arrogance in his stride. "You were stopped for speeding," Blake said coldly, showing no sign of friendliness. Leah responded calmly, "I don't think I violated any rule. Please check again." Blake nodded, but his eyes flickered with suspicion. "Can you show me your documents?" Leah handed over her driver's license and vehicle registration. Blake glanced over them carelessly, then asked, "Is there a phone nearby? I need to check some information." The exchange began to grow tense. Blake started asking questions more probing about attitude than document checks. "Why are you driving at this hour?" "Where are you going?" Leah answered politely. "I just came from a graduation party. I just want to go home." Blake frowned. "Is anyone driving you? Does anyone know where you're going?" Leah felt a suspicion rising but remained calm. When Leah tried to take out her phone to call her father, hoping for support in this tense situation, Blake suddenly lost patience. "Don't touch your phone," I said. "Stop right now," Blake barked. Leah was surprised. "I just want to call a relative to explain the situation." The misunderstanding began to spread as Blake thought Leah was resisting and might pose a danger to him. His eyes shifted from suspicion to panic. "Open the car door now." Blake shouted, his hand already reaching for the handgun at his side. Leah panicked, trying to explain, but her words seemed cut off by the pounding heartbeat and tension in the air. In an instant, Blake drew his gun and fired the fatal shot. A loud bang tore through the peaceful night. Leah collapsed, blood flowing from the wound, creating a scene both heartbreaking and haunting. The wail of ambulance sirens echoed from afar. Hurried footsteps filled the streets, and the voice calling Leah's name, her father, Judge David Johnson, wove together an unforgettable tragic story. Analysis of the event showed that haste, prejudice, and lack of emotional control led to this tragedy. This is a painful lesson about training and behavioral standards in law enforcement, as well as the necessity of respecting human rights in all situations. Can you feel Leah's vulnerability and fear in her final moments, and Blake's hurried actions leading to an unimaginable mistake? Let us continue to follow this tragic story through its aftermath and the community's response in the next part. At that moment, the dark night of Cedar Hills shattered with the roaring gunshot, a blast turning silent space instantly into a nightmare. Leah Johnson, a young woman with a bright future, suddenly collapsed right there, blood staining the small street red. The sirens of police and ambulance sounded nearby, but in Leah's mind, time seemed to slow down. She struggled to breathe weakly, her trembling hand reaching for the phone in her purse. "Dad, Dad, I need you." Leah's voice was faint and broken, as if her words were the last thread connecting her to this world. Nearby, Officer Michael Blake's eyes flashed with regret and panic. "Oh God, I didn't mean for this." Blake murmured, stepping closer to Leah but afraid to touch her. Medical personnel arrived quickly, doing their best to save Leah, but the wound was too severe. Leah was rushed into the ambulance. Police and witnesses stood silently, unable to believe what had just happened. That night in the emergency room, Leah's father, Judge David Johnson, received the call. He sat quietly, his heart choking, tears welling, as he stared at the phone screen. "Leah," he whispered, unable to believe his ears. He hurried to the hospital where his beloved daughter lay critically injured. "Leah, you have to fight. I believe you can make it," he said determinedly, gripping her hand tightly. But fate could not be reversed. Under the cold emergency room light, Leah passed away, leaving behind a broken family and a community drowned in grief. This incident was not only a family tragedy, but also the beginning of a larger battle, a fight against racial discrimination, abuse of power, and injustice within the police force. Before the incident, Blake had been warned about his harsh attitude and discriminatory behavior. But the system failed to stop it. Questions arose. Why was a person with a bad record still allowed to work? Why were warnings ignored? This is when we realize that one wrong act can take a life and change many others forever. Can you feel the pain of Leah's family, the community's disappointment, and the turmoil in Officer Blake's mind? Let us continue following the investigation and the pursuit of justice in the next part. The next day, sunlight shone over Cedar Hills but could not soothe the overwhelming pain in the hearts of the people. News of Leah Johnson's tragic death spread like a storm, stirring the entire community. In front of Leah's home, where she once lived with her family, fresh flowers and signs reading "Justice for Leah" were neatly placed. People gathered together, sharing their sorrow, outrage, and thirst for justice. "We cannot stay silent when tragedies like this happen," said Maria, a local resident in tears. "Leah is just one among many victims of injustice and racial discrimination." Social organizations and advocacy groups began organizing marches calling for justice for Leah and demanding comprehensive reform within the police force. At the first press conference, Judge David Johnson, with a swollen face and a voice heavy with emotion, spoke out, "I am not only Leah's father, but also a citizen and a judge. I demand a public, transparent, and fair investigation." His message was widely received, becoming a symbol for the fight against racial discrimination and abuse of power. Robert, Leah's close friend and also a social activist, said at a community meeting, "We must stand up for Leah, for all those who cannot speak." However, while the community condemned the incident, the Cedar Hills Police Department initially remained silent or engaged in cover-up. This story not only exposed cracks within the police, but also revealed a wide gap between law enforcement and the community they serve. Pressure from the community and media forced authorities to launch a serious investigation with the FBI involved to ensure objectivity. Deep analysis of the event showed that without the strong voices of the family community and media, the case could have been forgotten. Can you imagine the power of the community and how they transformed the story from tragedy into a call for justice? Let's continue to explore the investigation process, the evidence gathered, and the first steps in the search for truth in the next part. In the dark, small room of Cedar Hills Hospital, the dim light fell on the distraught face of Judge David Johnson. The powerful figure of the justice system was now just a grieving father who lost his only daughter, Leah. He sat beside the empty hospital bed, memories of Leah playing like slow-motion scenes in his mind. "Her mother called me, told me she was hurt seriously." He choked, his voice filled with sorrow. David recalled times studying with Leah, discussing justice and peace, and her dreams coming true. "Leah was my light, the reason I kept going in this work. But now I must fight not only for her, but for all those without a voice." In his temporary hotel room, David continued calling officials, lawyers, and FBI representatives. "I will not let this pass easily. Justice must be served." He also spent time meeting with family, friends, and the community to share grief and inspire the collective fight. "We cannot let silence continue. Change must come." Conversations with his wife, Ellen Johnson, were full of empathy and comfort. "David, we must be strong not only for Leah, but for all others." He nodded, his gaze resolute and unwavering. From immense pain, David began his journey to become the strongest voice for justice, confronting the very system he once served. He leveraged his power and legal knowledge to push for an independent and transparent investigation, uncompromising against abuse of power and racial discrimination. David Johnson was not just a grieving father, but a symbol of courage and determination against injustice in society. Can you feel the strength in his pain, the steadfastness in his resolve, and the flame of justice that never dies within him? Continue following the story of the investigation and the quest for truth in the next part. Immediately upon request from Judge David Johnson, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, swiftly launched an independent investigation into this tragic case. The investigation room was lit by cold white lights, where every step toward revealing the truth was carried out with caution and rigor. Detective Angela Moore, leading the investigation, was a woman of steel spirit and extensive experience in cases related to civil rights and racial discrimination. Upon receiving the case file, she told her colleagues, "We are not just looking for the perpetrator, but must also uncover the veil of prejudice and abuse of power." The body camera footage from Officer Michael Blake became the most crucial piece of evidence. Angela and the investigative team spent hours reviewing every video clip, analyzing Blake's actions, gaze, and gestures as he approached Leah. The footage showed Blake stopping Leah's car rudely with a clearly racialized, suspicious stare. His cold words and overly harsh behavior were vividly revealed in every frame. When Leah took out her phone, Blake immediately warned her, then drew his gun and fired the fatal shot. "That was a rushed, uncontrolled action that exceeded his authority," Angela commented. Additionally, the team gathered witness testimonies from around the scene and examined traces on the vehicle, bloodstains, and other physical evidence. Autopsy analysis confirmed the fatal wound was caused by a bullet fired at close range, proving Blake's act was intentional and not an accidental discharge. The FBI also investigated Blake's record and prior complaints, uncovering a series of reports about discriminatory attitudes and abuse of power that the Cedar Hills Police Department had ignored or failed to address properly. Angela Moore convened a meeting with relevant legal authorities, stating, "This case is not just about one death, but symbolizes a system that needs radical change." Close coordination between the FBI and Leah's family created immense pressure on the police department and local government. Can you imagine the tension and pressure the investigative team faced to uncover the truth, and the hope and trust Leah's family placed in justice? Continue to follow me through the trial developments and how the truth was revealed in the next part. As news of Leah Johnson's death spread, Cedar Hills and the nation were shaken by an unprecedented wave of grief and outrage. Media outlets, from traditional newspapers to social networks, focused coverage, creating a widespread wave of attention. The next morning, signs reading "Justice for Leah" appeared across the city's streets. Communities gathered, raising banners and chanting slogans, demanding fairness and transparency in the case. "I cannot remain silent when a life is taken unjustly," said Maria, a local resident speaking before the crowd with tears in her eyes. Television news continuously updated on the case, analyzing legal and social perspectives. Reporters asked, "Is this a typical example of racial discrimination in American law enforcement?" On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForLeah spread rapidly, attracting millions of interactions and shares. Many celebrities and social activists also voiced support, calling for systemic change. David Johnson, Leah's father and a judge, drew special media attention. He appeared in interviews speaking about his personal loss, while emphasizing the need for a true justice revolution. "We cannot let Leah's death be meaningless," he said on live television. "There must be change, accountability, and transparency." However, the initial response from the Cedar Hills Police Department was cautious, offering vague explanations and avoiding specific questions. This sparked skepticism and anger in the community. Some local leaders had to step forward to reassure and pledge support for the investigation, but public opinion remained hard to satisfy. Meanwhile, many legal, sociological, and human rights experts analyzed the case from multiple angles. They pointed out that this was not an isolated incident, but the result of a system lacking oversight and transparency. Leah's story became a symbol of the nationwide struggle against racial discrimination and abuse of power in policing. Can you feel the power of the media and community in driving justice, how the yearning for change was ignited? Continue with me to see how the trial of Officer Michael Blake unfolds in the next part of the story. On the day Michael Blake's trial began, the Cedar Hills courtroom was packed with residents, media, and stakeholders. Natural light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the faces of witnesses, the defendant, and the victim's family. The prosecution, led by prosecutor Sarah Martinez, a young determined woman passionate about justice, opened the proceedings. We are here not just to try a man, but to send a message about fairness and accountability within the police force. Sarah declared, powerfully impressing everyone present. Michael Blake, dressed in a neat uniform, but with a tense and cold expression, sat beside his defense attorney. His lawyer, Robert Hayes, renowned for defending police officers, immediately launched a strategy to mitigate Blake's guilt. Your Honor, my client acted under dangerous circumstances, facing immense pressure and uncertainty, Hayes argued, seeking sympathy from the jury. But Leah's family, especially Judge David Johnson and prosecutor Sarah Martinez, rejected this defense. David sat silently tearful, yet with a piercing gaze. As witnesses took the stand, each testimony painted a vivid, truthful picture of the event. Blake exceeded his authority, driven by racial prejudice. A key witness, Emily Harris, a driver near the scene, described, "I saw Blake yelling and threatening Leah just because she tried to explain. He lost control of his emotions." Bodycam footage was shown vividly, capturing tense moments, Blake's suspicious glances, and his loss of composure. The courtroom trembled before the undeniable evidence, judges' eyes grave and attentive. The defense tried to discredit the evidence, but prosecutor Sarah Martinez emphasized, the truth cannot be denied by words or legal tactics. The trial lasted several days with intense details, often deeply moving the audience. Can you sense the stifling courtroom atmosphere? The confrontation between justice and denial, and the perseverance of those fighting for truth. Stay with me in the coming parts to find out how the trial concludes and whether justice will truly be served. The trial reached a critical phase as witnesses were called one by one. Each story, each testimony was a vivid, truthful piece that together painted a full picture of this heartbreaking case. First was Emily Harris, who was driving near the scene on that fateful night. She stood in court, her voice clear yet emotional. "I saw Officer Blake yelling at Leah," a young woman trying to explain. But instead of listening, he just glared and seemed unable to control his emotions. The judges listened attentively, their eyes occasionally meeting to underline the gravity of what was revealed. Next was Thomas Reed, a local resident who witnessed the entire incident from start to finish. He recounted, "Leah was very calm. She did nothing provocative. But Blake was different. He seemed to seek to impose authority excessively." In the courtroom, soft sighs and nods of empathy quietly echoed from the audience. Finally, a police behavior expert was invited to analyze Blake's actions based on video footage and testimonies. He explained Blake's reaction was not just personal attitude, but reflected a system lacking adequate multicultural awareness, training, and emotional control under stress. The witnesses' testimonies not only confirmed Blake's wrongdoing, but also highlighted the need for reform in the police force to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Every story, every piece of evidence presented stirred strong emotions in the courtroom, leaving everyone deeply moved and reflective. Can you feel the strength in those small voices? The weight of truth and the pressure on those who did wrong. The trial continued with unexpected twists as both sides began fiercely debating truth and responsibility. Join me to explore the next chapter of the story, where dramatic final arguments will be made. The trial reached its peak tension as the defense attorney for Officer Michael Blake began presenting strategies to lessen his client's responsibility. Robert Hayes, an experienced defense lawyer with sharp eyes and a calm voice, stood before the jury. "Your Honor, my client had no intention of harming Leah Johnson." He began, speaking slowly but with weight. It was a tense, unpredictable situation, and Michael Blake acted within his authority to protect himself. Hayes proceeded to exploit details aimed at weakening the evidence and testimonies against Blake. The body camera footage can be misinterpreted in some moments. The pressures and uncertainties of police work sometimes lead to unintended mistakes. The defense also attempted to blame the victim, suggesting Leah may not have fully cooperated or acted in a way that forced Blake's reaction. "We asked the court to consider the circumstances and pressures Blake faced during his duty," Hayes said, locking eyes with the jury. However, prosecutor Sarah Martinez refused to let these arguments slide. She rose, her voice powerful. "There can be no justification for violence and abuse of power based on work pressure. Leah Johnson was a young woman abiding by the law, simply seeking fair treatment. The debate between the two sides grew increasingly fierce, with accusations and rebuttals exchanged continuously, making the courtroom atmosphere suffocatingly tense. The defense also employed delaying tactics, repeatedly requesting trial postponements, citing the need for more time to prepare or gather new evidence. These maneuvers aimed to prolong the trial, hoping to lessen public attention and wear down the prosecution and the victim's family. But with the prosecutor's steadfastness and strong community support, these tactics failed to shake the determination to bring the truth to light. Can you feel the tension, pressure, and injustice that Leah's family and supporters endured throughout this process? Join me in the next part as the role of the police union and its deeper influences are revealed. Amid the courtroom tension, an essential factor is the role of the police union. The police union, originally established to protect officers' rights and welfare, now stood in the complex whirlwind between justice and shielding abuses of power. The union's lawyer, Helen Carter, confidently and sharply took the stand. "We do not defend wrongdoing," she told the jury, "but we protect the legal rights of our members, including the right to a fair trial." She outlined the internal procedures the union follows to ensure fairness for officers, but also acknowledged that some cases require careful consideration. However, the prosecution and Leah's family argued that the police union used its power to protect wrongdoing, delaying timely and fair handling. David Johnson, Leah's father, spoke candidly in an interview. "The police union has a great responsibility to uphold ethics and fairness, but when they side with wrongdoing, they become a barrier to justice." Debates over the police union's role extended beyond the courtroom into the community and media. Legal experts also weighed in, analyzing how unions can sometimes create safe zones for offending officers, complicating accountability. Meanwhile, some police officers and union members argued that protecting members is necessary to maintain solidarity and effective work. This conflict reflects a deep issue within the policing and justice system, demanding a delicate balance between individual rights and official responsibilities. Can you sense the complexity, contradictions, and pressures from both sides, as well as the crucial importance of transparency and accountability in the system? Let's continue exploring the role of leadership in this process with David Johnson's appearance in the next part. During the days of the trial, Judge David Johnson not only bore the pain of losing his daughter as a father, but also carried the heavy responsibility of leading the spirit and justice in this fight. He understood clearly that this was not only his family's battle, but a symbol for millions suffering injustice within the system. In a private meeting with lawyers and close associates, David spoke with firm determination. "We cannot let Leah's death be in vain. This is the moment we must stand up and demand transparency and fairness from the police system." He continued, "I will use every power and influence I have to ensure this case is handled with utmost fairness. We need a trial that not only prosecutes one person, but marks a change throughout the entire system." In a media interview, he expressed, "Leadership is not always easy, especially when facing overwhelming forces and pressures. But I believe my responsibility is to never back down." David often spent time talking with community members, listening to their stories of hardships and injustice. He told them, "I understand your pain and doubts, and I am here to fight alongside you." Not only did he stand to defend justice for Leah, but he also actively promoted police training programs on cultural awareness and emotional control. Under his leadership, the Cedar Hills Police Department began taking its first steps toward transparency and accountability. However, David also faced many difficulties from colleagues and insiders who wished to maintain the status quo. He shared in an internal meeting, "Change is not easy, but it is necessary. We must put the community's interests above all else." Can you feel the immense pressure he endured, the steadfastness in his heart, and the heavy burden on the shoulders of a leader? Join me as we continue to follow the journey of seeking justice in the next parts. After months of grief and a tense trial, the Johnson family remained resilient amid life's storm. David Johnson, along with his wife Ellen, became a pillar of strength not only for themselves but also for the community and justice advocates. In the small house once filled with Leah's laughter, moments of silent emotion now prevailed. Ellen tightly held a photo of Leah, her voice choking with emotion. "My daughter was the bravest person I've ever known. Though she's no longer with us, her spirit lives on." David sat beside her, eyes distant. Leah gave me the strength to never give up. We will continue the fight not just for Leah, but for all those wronged. Friends in the community rallied to support the family, organizing memorials and events to raise awareness about racial discrimination and human rights. Maya, Leah's close friend, shared in an interview, Leah was more than a friend. She was a flame that inspired us all. Her courage helped us stand and speak out. The Johnson family also decided to establish a charitable fund in Leah's name aimed at supporting victims of racial discrimination and police violence. They believed that from this pain could grow something better, a positive change for society. David shared justice is not just about punishing the guilty, but about healing and building a better future. Throughout this journey, Leah's family demonstrated the power of resilience and courage, even in the face of the greatest challenges. Can you feel the warmth in these moments of remembrance, the bond between family and community, and the faith in justice? Follow the journey of the trial and the final decisions in the next part. On the day the trial concluded, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier than ever. The three esteemed judges sat silently preparing to deliver the final verdict on the fate of Officer Michael Blake. David Johnson, Leah's father, sat beside his family, tightly holding his wife's hand, his gaze focused and filled with worry. He knew this moment would determine not only Blake's life, but also justice for his daughter and millions of others awaiting fairness. Prosecutor Sarah Martinez stood, her voice firm. Your honors, please remember, this is not just a case, but a call for justice for all who are oppressed, discriminated against, and abused. On the other side, defense attorney Robert Hayes tried to remain calm, hoping for a miracle for his client. After a prolonged suspense, the chief judge began reading the sentence. Michael Blake is found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted. Many wept while Blake stood stunned, unable to believe what he heard. David Johnson exhaled in relief, tears streaming down his cheeks, knowing that a part of justice had been served. Media and the community quickly responded positively, seeing this as a major step forward in the fight against racial discrimination and police violence. However, voices of skepticism arose, questioning whether this verdict would sufficiently deter misconduct and reform the system. Legal experts emphasized that beyond punishing individuals, extensive systemic reforms were necessary to prevent similar tragedies. David Johnson stated at a press conference, "This verdict is not the end, but the beginning of a longer journey toward building a fairer and more transparent system." Can you feel the relief, joy mixed with pain and hope in that moment? Continue following the broad impacts of the case in the next part of the story. After the verdict, the public reaction went beyond celebration, shifting toward deeper reflections on social change. The story of Leah Johnson, a talented young woman whose life was unjustly taken, became a symbol of the battle against racial discrimination and police abuse. At Cedar Hills Community Center, many workshops and forums were held to discuss police reform solutions and promote transparency in law enforcement. Activists, lawyers, community representatives, and even some young officers all raised their voices with a shared goal: building a fairer system. Robert, Leah's close friend, emphasized in a speech, "We must turn this pain into a driving force for change. Not just in Cedar Hills, but nationwide, justice and equality must come first." New training programs were widely implemented, focusing on multicultural awareness, conflict resolution skills, and emotional control in tense situations. Local authorities began reviewing policies and enacting stricter regulations on police conduct. The media closely monitored developments, reflecting strong public support while warning of remaining challenges. Social media became a powerful tool to spread the message, sparking a social movement with millions participating. However, there were difficulties and resistance from some interest groups, slowing the reform process. David Johnson shared, "The road ahead is far from easy, but we cannot give up. Change starts with each one of us." Encounters between police and the community became more frequent, aiming to rebuild trust and mutual understanding. Can you feel the power of unity, perseverance, and faith in a fairer future? Continue following the story in the next part as we explore the process of healing and reconciliation within the community. After months of turmoil, the city of Cedar Hills began a journey of healing. The wounds were not only scars on the skin, but also deep injuries in the hearts of Leah Johnson's family and the entire community. In a small hall in the city center, a meeting between community members and police representatives was held. People came not only to listen, but to share, understand, and forgive. David Johnson, as a grieving father and judge, opened the meeting with sincere words. We cannot change the past, but we can build the future together. He looked around the room, his eyes filled with hope. That is why I am here, not only for Leah, but for everyone who desires a just and compassionate society. Young police officers also participated, listening and showing commitment to change. Michael Evans, a young officer, said, "We realize that building trust is not just a task, but a personal responsibility." Meanwhile, community members shared stories of times they were treated unjustly, hoping this time would be different. A mother in the community said, "We want safety. We want our children to live in an environment free of prejudice and violence." These open dialogues became bridges connecting police and residents, gradually removing gaps and misunderstandings. David Johnson emphasized, forgiveness is not forgetting, but the first step to healing and moving forward. Leah's family also joined community activities, spreading messages of courage and hope. Can you feel the warmth of humanity, the bonds formed, and the faith in a brighter tomorrow? Let's continue to follow the profound lessons drawn from this story in the next part. Leah Johnson's story became a deep lesson, not only for her family, but for the entire community and legal system. In the final days of the trial, many meetings and seminars were held to analyze mistakes, draw lessons, and propose practical solutions. David Johnson, as both the judge and Leah's father, actively participated in these forums. He said the first and most important lesson is that every individual must recognize their responsibility, not only as police officers, but as citizens. He continued to emphasize the importance of educating and training police on multicultural awareness, emotional control, and communication skills. Legal experts agreed that the legal system needs stricter measures to monitor and handle misconduct within the police force. Technological reforms such as equipping body cameras and recording devices proved effective in enhancing transparency. Alongside that, community involvement in oversight and cooperation with the police was highlighted as an indispensable part of the reform process. David Johnson shared, "We need a system where justice is not swayed by power or prejudice, but always prioritizes the interests of the community." Additionally, Leah's family established a charity fund to support victims of police violence and racial discrimination, continuing to spread Leah's message of resilience and courage. Can you feel the power of learning from mistakes and the belief in society's capacity to change and grow? Let's move into the final part of the story, a message and a call to action for all of us. As Leah Johnson's story draws to a close, its resonance continues to echo in the minds of everyone. It is not just a story of loss and justice, but a profound reminder of each individual's responsibility in society. David Johnson, in his final talk before the community, shared with a warm, heartfelt voice, "Leah was not only my daughter. She is a symbol of faith, resilience, and our shared thirst for justice." He continued, his gaze distant. "We cannot stand by in the face of injustice. Each of us has the right and duty to speak up and defend what is right." In the hall, many eyes were filled with tears, yet brimming with hope and determination. Maya, Leah's close friend, stood and spoke with strength. "Leah's story is not just ours. It belongs to everyone fighting against injustice in the world. Let's spread this story together. Speak up, act, and make a change." That call was not merely words, but action, a beginning for a stronger movement against racial discrimination and police violence. Social media, community campaigns, and workshops continue to keep the flame of justice burning bright. You who are listening to this story can also be part of the change. Share Leah's story. Speak out against all forms of racial discrimination. Join community activities and support those facing injustice. Justice is not the duty of a few. It is the responsibility of all of us. Finally, remember that every small action can make a great difference. Never remain silent in the face of injustice, for silence is complicity. Thank you for accompanying me through Leah Johnson's story. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories and valuable lessons. And remember, justice is not always easy, but it is always worth fighting for. Are you ready to be the change